Welcome to another Now Bali Podcast, a very special episode today. I have two special guests who come from and represent Bali 1928. It's an ongoing international and interdisciplinary project established by American ethnomusicologist Edward Herbst in 2002 to research, find, understand, document, explain, restore, re-release, and repatriate the first published recordings of music in Bali, along with rare film footage and photographs of musicians and dance drama performances from the 1930s. It's a very comprehensive description of the project, but do you think that it encapsulates what Bali 1928 is?
Well, it puts it in a nutshell, but I don't think anyone could quite grasp. We were just talking about that. Grasp it unless they actually start to experience what the media, what the films, recordings, photographs, what they convey. Mm-hmm. So in words, it's a start. Mm-hmm. It's a good start.
Well, hopefully we can unpack that a little bit today. Yeah. So next to me, I have Dr. Edward Herbst, who has a PhD in ethnomusicology from Wesleyan University. Mm-hmm. And you first came here in 1972.
Yes.
If that's right. And next to Ed, as he will be referred to going forward, we have Imade Marlowe Bandem, who is the project manager of Bali 1928. Originally, career-wise, a banker.
True.
But a vinyl DJ, music lover, art lover, and general lover of life, and quite a lot of hobbies, if I'm not mistaken, Marlowe, right? You have a lot of hobbies.
Yeah, it's nice to be part of the creative communities here in Bali especially. And it's been an honor to be part of this really incredible project,
So this project, it's an interesting link. Before we sort of get into how it started, I just want to talk about you both coming together to work on this. Now, people who are familiar with Balinese culture or research might know your dad, Marlowe, Imade Bandem, who was one of the founding fathers of the Bali Arts Festival, is also a researcher of Balinese music, a famous dancer as well, I believe. So was any of that part of the connection between you two?
Oh, absolutely. I've known Marlowe's father and mother since 1972. So his dad was in the MA Masters of Arts program at UCLA while I was here with my wife in 72. We were here for a year. So I was just 20 years old at the time. We were both in 20. And Marlowe's mother and father came back from Bali in probably, I think it might have been January of 73 or December of, I don't quite remember. But he got his MA at UCLA, and then we met because we were part of kind of a back then there weren't very many foreigners studying arts and culture, especially studying, real performance in the performing arts, really doing it. It was a small community. So anyway, we actually, before I even went to Bali, I sent a letter to the head of the UCLA ethnomusicology program, Mantle Hood, and asked if he had any suggestions, because I didn't know anyone who had been to Bali back then, except when I came. And he said, I'll put you in touch with Marlowe Bandem. So Pag Bandem wrote me a letter from LA to New York, and we were in touch then. So anyway, I've known him since then. And and then I was here for a year and a half. We were here for a year and a half, my wife and I, 81. I was on a Fulbright for PhD then. And Pag Bandem was already the director of ASTI back then, Academy Sanitari Indonesia. So that's before ISI. So he came back from the States and became that. So I was, part of that community. We've always been living in the villages and studying in the villages, but we've always, and especially I, have always been interrelated with the what do you call it? The institutions of learning, just because they're another layer of peers. My peers are also musicians and dancers in the villages, but another set of peers are people who are part of the education, the academic and performing arts community in the schools. That's it. I've always tried to it's not try, it's just natural to be involved with people on all different kind of realms of Balinese Indonesian society.
Firstly, you're an ethnomusicologist,
Right.
which in itself is a bit of a mouthful, just to explain your research field.
Sure.
But you were focusing on dance and music in Bali,
Right.
and so you're obviously in the field already. But how did this project to repatriate
Yes.
all these documentation back to the island start?
Okay, so really, a guy named Alan Evans in New York City, he was a musicologist and on the faculty at Mannes College of Music in New York, and was one of the world's great audio restoration people, experts, and had an organization producing CDs and called Arbiter of Cultural Traditions. And now there's a branch called World Arbiter. Alan was particularly interested in early 20th century new music, contemporary music from the 1920s and 30s and 40s. And he happened to be listening to a radio program on WNYC in New York City, and a friend of his it was his show, and he was interviewing Carol Oja, who wrote a book about Colin McPhee. And Colin McPhee was one of the principal
Musical researchers.
He was the principal music researcher from like 1931 till 38 in Bali. So they were playing some of the recordings, and Carol must have had, there were recordings you could get back then from cassettes from UCLA. They would sell you a set of cassettes, and they were playing the recordings, and Alan heard the music, and he thought, gee, this sounds like what Steve Reich is doing, and Philip Glass, John Adams, a lot of contemporary composers, and even, of course, Debussy and, other composers, Olivier Messiaen, all different classical composers and minimalist composers, contemporary composers. So Alan got really interested and started to just collect, as he had done for decades, with not with world music, all European music, European American music. Ours was the first project of Asian music, non-Western music. So anyway, he put together a collection of 78s that he located and mastered. And
I think just for people who aren't familiar,
78. A 78 RPM. So LPs, long playing records, acetate plates, round plates, and the ones that have full albums that we know in, say, rock music, those are 33 RPM revolutions per minute. And a 78 was an older form. In Bali, they were called orgal. That was like the Balinese language one, or piringan hitam is black plates here. So Alan put together, he managed to get enough for a CD, in addition to a number of tracks of Colin McPhee's transcriptions for piano, for two pianos.
Wow.
And actually it was a performance, it was a recording of Colin McPhee in 1940 with Benjamin Britten, who's a great, famous British composer. Benjamin Britten and Colin McPhee playing together. And Bela Bartok, the great composer, toured the U.S. Playing those transcriptions of Balinese music in 1941 with his wife. So this stuff was going around. So anyway, Alan put together a collection, and he got my name through the head of the Asia Society Performing Arts Program, told him about me. So he contacted me, and we got together, and he played me the recordings, and I had already heard the cassettes from UCLA decades before, but didn't even have the collection. I wasn't into archiving so much. I'm into live music, even in Bali, studying performance. He asked me to write the CD notes. So I wrote them without coming to Bali. It was didn't have money to come to Bali. So I was able to communicate with friends in Bali by fax back then. I think I sent Pak Bandem a fax with a list of questions for him to bring to Made Barata, who is now deceased, but Made Barata was a great Balinese composer, and it was his father, Made Rogog, who composed probably the biggest amount of pieces that were recorded in 1928. Made Rogog was one of the great innovative composers of Kabyar style. So I gave Pak Bandem a list of questions, and he came to Pak Barata and asked them, and then sent me back.
What are the things that you're asking?
With Pak Barata, what were the questions? The questions were, how is this different from, say, the sources? So, say, Gong Gade, so the more classical court gamelan, or the Palais Gongan, so the Legong gamelan, that Kabyar came into being in the teens of the early 20th century. I'm always interested in music as not so much as a product, but like an ecology, a whole biosystem. How does it grow? Where does it come from? What are the roots of it? So Bali is the perfect place for that, because everything is has been very much growing in a big ecological system of
sort of a constant state of evolution,
and
adaptation
within the religion and the social life and all that, which I've been always interested in. I happened to get a grant to come to Bali from Asian Cultural Council for some other project, and I brought back then it was cassettes. So I brought the cassettes, and I visited Pak Barata, that son of Made Rogog, the 1920s composer, with a number of Balinese friends, artist, musician, singer friends, dancer friends. And I played him the recordings. And one of them in particular, Churik Ngaras, Starling's Kissing, right, is the name of it. That one in particular, he just started to, his eyes watered, and he was laughing, and he said, I haven't heard this since I was about 10 years old. And he remembered it, and he said, can you bring me a cassette of this?
He hadn't heard that specific composition?
That composition since he was a 10-year-old. So anyway, he heard this one, Churik Ngaras, Starling's Kissing, and he said, I haven't heard this since I was 10. Can you bring me a cassette? And I said, well, I'll be back in Denpasar in a week. I could bring it. And he said, how about tomorrow? This is like how old, he was like in his 80s then, Yeah. How about tomorrow? I said, okay. If Pak Barata asks you and it's so important. So I dubbed it up in wherever I was living at the time. I brought it the next day, and then his nephew, Gede Udarta, a nephew of his, I ran into a week later, and he said Pak Barata already taught the children's gamelan in his village, the Churik Ngaras. So he wanted it so that he could teach it like that. So that was one initial spark. Chutuskan, it's like one spark that kind of hit me. Another was Nyoman Rambang, who was one of the great teachers at Kokar, the conservatory, who came from the village of Sesetan. And there was a Gambu ensemble that was recorded. That's real classical dance drama in his village. And with long flutes, long 1 meter long flutes. And also Pak Rambang, I played him cassettes or the cassette with those pieces, compositions of the Gambu from his village. And he said, well, I haven't heard this since I was 6, because when the Japanese invaded, they buried all the instruments and they were never revived again. So the tradition totally died out in Sesetan since the Japanese occupation. So he again was eager to have these, restored and to have the recordings to use.
A revival using that sort of that re-memory from the recordings as a revival. So it's a kind of a catalyst towards it.
Absolutely, a catalyst, and almost a what do you call it? It's like a hologram. It's a reality of what was the music. And that's what's continued. So what happened is I came back to the States and talked to Alan Evans of Arbiter. We just decided we have to just do this. We have to really get all the recordings we could possibly find. Luckily, there's a guy named Philip Yampolsky, who I always give credit to. Philip has been involved with Indonesian music since I have, 71, 72. So Philip, I guess we released the first CD, and Philip knew me, and he got in touch and said, I could give you a list, a finder's guide. Mm-hmm. And he did it just for Alan and me, a personal list. And it was, if you want Tembang Adri, Pupuh Adri, that's a song, sung by Ida Bagus Boda, in 1928 or 29. There's a copy at the University of Amsterdam.
So you
the
had
only copy. Eh?
The only copy, that one.
Wow.
Okay, the Adri was the only copy in the world that we knew of. That's right.
True.
That was at University of Amsterdam. So I had to get in touch with University of Amsterdam. I found cooperation everywhere. It was mostly my job, more than Alan's, I think. But Alan was always finding them. He could find them also, sometimes on the internet.
Mm-hmm. I mean, for me, it's really to be motivated when, growing up, you listen to these inspiring and beautiful stories. Mm-hmm. And, among many, Edward Herbst is one of the names that keeps being discussed when Pak Bandem and Bu Swasti, were with me in the car or during dinner, especially with Ed's research in vocal music. And they keep talking about these legacies of, maestros, virtuosos. And I mean, for me, growing up, I really had the interest in the first part of the 20th century, not only in terms of Bali, but also the world, because for me, that was the period of discovery and creation. And, we can go back to how, during the 1908, the maiden flight of the Wright brothers, and then you have the mass production of the T-Ford, and then you have Albert Einstein and his theory of relativity. And during that time, also in Bali, was the time of creation and discovery. Bali, the discovery of Bali as the safe haven for art and cultures that is really completely distant to what is happening all around Indonesia during the time, or Nusantara. And in Bali itself, 1914, 1915, you have the birth of the kebiar, the new playing techniques and compositions of playing the gamelan. Kebiar, it's the speed of lightning, Pak, yeah? It's lightning, yeah?
Krebek.
Yeah, so
it's a combination of lightning and the thunderclap. Mm-hmm. That word Balinese, it's both the sound
and then having these musicians play this new technique lightning fast. Mm-hmm. And really motivates me as a Balinese to really unearth and rediscover and provide questions about how the legacies keeps changing in the continuum of time. And that's why in 2013, when Ed came, we were just after a while we met up, and then Ed was talking about this repatriation project, and me as a banker, I am familiar with repatriation, but it's always in the terms of economic or financial repatriation. And I do believe that there has never been a stance by the Indonesian government to do a repatriation project. And we made the gentleman agreement. We just shook hands, and then without knowing what's gonna happen in the future, I said, Ed, please involve me. I would be your partner here, with our foundation, the Widya Dharma Santi Foundation. And I do believe that I could bring that sense of management to the project that sometimes is lacking in art projects in Bali and Indonesia. Because when we do talk about the connection, the communication, and especially the collaboration, there would be challenges, cross-cultural communication. Absolutely. And we've been enduring that, and we learn from each other, not in terms of the wealth of the collection, but also in terms of how to really construct a project that has been praised by many, by our mentors, our heroes like Anthony Seeger, He's the
He was the founding director of
yes,
Smithsonian
yeah.
Folkways Records in Washington,
And
D.C.
he really gave us credit and praise that this is how you should do and conceive a repatriation project that involves the best of both worlds.
So what are the elements of Bali 1928 in terms of, what are the project elements? So there's, as you talked about earlier, there's actually searching for the recordings, whether it's music or film or photography in academic institutions. What is the next phase after that once you start? I'm sure that's an ongoing phase, but what are the sort of steps once you have the material? Maybe, what do you do specifically? What are your project outlines? Basically?
Well, actually, the number of actual 78 RPM records is, well, it's finite. So basically, between Andrew Toth's list and then Philip Yampolsky's list, there were about 99 records, I think, that they had listed. We managed to get all of them.
Wow.
And then we got about, it came to 111. So it was 5 CDs full of musical recordings that we produced in 2015
Yes.
and had a launching at Bentara Budaya with, that's cutting to the chase, but I could say that was 7 years ago. And basically, it was Stikholm production, right? Marlowe
True.
and Stikholm. It was a set of 5 volumes, and each volume had a CD in it and a DVD. And the CD we developed thematically. So each CD. One was Kibyar. It was just a full CD of Kibyar from North Bali, Busung Biu, and Tabanan, which is the village of Pangkung. These are major creators of the whole style. And then Belalawan, which is Denpasar. And the second volume was vocal music, solo, a cappella, without any gamelan. So it was all pupu or timbang, people would say, or kakawin or kidung. Volume 3 was music for dance. So it was like legong and joged and other that we could go into. And 4 was music for death and cremations. So it was all different genres that have to do with those kinds of rituals. So like angklung and others. And volume 5 was a little bit more contemporary. It was janger and arja.
True.
And arja, which is so popular now, but it was all male. And right up until, say, the recordings of 1928-29, one of the groups recorded in Blalawan was all males. And the group from Sesetan was a combination of males and females. So it was just shifting then. So anyway, we produced 1,000, was it?
Yes.
And originally we were going to sell them at cost or sell them cheaply, but wound up not selling any, I think, giving them away to the
community.
the community, the Sikha, the different village
Libraries,
groups,
schools,
libraries,
universities,
schools, and then the families
Yes.
of the artists.
Okay.
So the families, any family of, and then the film is a different story. So the recordings we have already copied with Alan Evans all the records that we have been able to find.
Okay.
And we don't know that any more exist.
Wow.
More recorded, I know, because I have the original list of Becca, of the Becca Company, and what they recorded, but we don't know that they actually produced the records, because this was 1929. So in, September, that the depression, that the stock market crashed and the world economy fell. So records weren't, well, they were popular in the US and Europe, but in Bali anyway,
Hard to come by.
nobody had record players.
Sure.
So anyway, the records, it's pretty finite. The films, we never searched. I never searched for a film. It was, in Balinese you say katangkilan, or, kabutulan. It's a coincidence.
Kebetulan, yeah.
So what happened was I made many trips to UCLA, where the Colin McPhee archive is. I'm not an East Coaster, but I would go out to Los Angeles. And I've spent weeks, really days and days and days, many times. And one time I was there, and the archivist, Aaron Bittel, said, it was Friday and I was about to leave, and he said, Ed, have you seen the McPhee films? I said, what?
Wait, how many years were you? How long had you spent?
Well, this was 2009, I think.
Yep.
I think it was 2009. I know faculty emeritus at UCLA, so people who were there for decades. And when
No
they
one
found
mentioned
out, they
the
said to
films.
me, no, they didn't know.
Oh,
So
wow.
they said, where did you find the McPhee films?
Wow.
I don't know. They had just digitized them, not perfectly, not the state of the art like now, which we're doing now. But anyway, I took a look. I had a flight back to New York, so I took a look at one DVD. I popped it in a DVD player, and I thought I recognized the Legon teacher, and it turned out to be correct, that he was Ida Bagus Boda, teaching Legon.
Wow.
And I flipped. I kind of lost my my wits. I literally. So UCLA has been extremely cooperative. They had this whole collection of McPhee films that nobody knew about, and then Colin McPhee's record collection was just given to UCLA. So that was the biggest source of the actual 78s. Were you going to say something?
Yeah, I mean, when we look, I mean, when we term the archive as Bali 1928, it does represent a specific golden era, a renaissance in the Balinese arts and culture.
Yeah.
It relates to what Ed just mentioned before about the collection of, the first ever commercial recordings that was done by Odeon and Becca, and during the time with the rising of tourism, from the openness of Bali after the demise of the kingdoms. 1906 we have the Puputan Badung, and then 1908 we have the Puputan Klungkung, which is the great battles against the colonialization, colonial government during the time. And after that, the Puri or the royal courts were not playing that part as the patronage for arts and culture. So everything became to the grassroots levels, which arts became more democratic, and it really allows the arts to bloom and mushroom pretty much all over the island.
So even within that small period in the early 1900s, because of that political change from the power centers being taken away from the kingdoms, that evolved Balinese dance and performing arts.
Exactly. No, Marlowe's making a great point. What happened was gamelan, all different gamelan sets, were actually just given from the Puris. The Puris didn't have a use for that. They didn't have the same huge social impact that they were having, and the gamelans were often given to the villages.
True.
So village the musicians were always, a lot of them were, you would say, Wang Jaba, were people without, the
Caste.
caste or that social status, with titles, Gusti or Anakagung or Ida Bagus Brahmana. So in the sense of gamelan, it was really democratized.
Yes.
And a lot of the people who had been already musicians became they had saka, they had their own clubs and their own members and equal members. So it's very democratic. A lot of stories about that.
I mean, I frequently make comparisons between the rise of Kebiar, the first recordings of Kebiar the rise of Kebiar in 1914, 1915 in North Bali, with the first recording, the first jazz recording by Nick La Rocca and the Dixieland Jazz Band, in 1917. So, we do make that connection that was a really interesting and intriguing times for the arts and culture all over the world. And then that brought, many researchers, artists to Bali, including Colin McPhee, Miguel Covarrubias, and then we have Catherine Mershon, Gregory Bates, we have Gregor Kraus, with his excellent street photography, as we say today. And then we have Rolf de Mare, Claire Hall, all these big names that came to Bali to do research, to do really academic research that made that connection, especially when we have Walter Speirs also already in Bali, I usually term him as the public relations, that he would be the guy to go to when you come to Bali.
Yeah.
Well, even Charlie Chaplin went to Walter
Yes,
Speirs.
true.
Yeah,
already.
exactly.
Yeah. And in 1931, McPhee had the opportunity to listen to records, and he just decided with Jane Below, his wife, to come to Bali to do, an expedition, a short excursion at first, but it came to become a longer stay. And then he really interacted with the Balinese arts and culture and the people, and he became, he created not only the tabu-tabuhan, but he wrote, these monumental books, the Music in Bali, A House in Bali, Kofarubias with the Island of Bali, that really put Bali center stage. And coming back to the 1928-29 recordings by Odeon and Becca, these Germany record labels, they came to Bali for commercial purposes. They wanted to sell and produce and sell these records for the Balinese people.
They wanted to sell it back to the Balinese.
Yes.
It was an ill-informed
Yeah.
project because so the word for a record amongst older Balinese is orgal, not just piringan hitam, but orgal. So it's kind of like an organ, and the name of a gramophone player, like a record player, was orgal also. Now, very few people had orgal, had record players, so it was just a few puris. The Puri in Karangasam, Puri Gede in Karangasam, the one in Payangan had one. A few shops, like Chinese shops, like in Sukawati there was one.
Yep.
And then on Jalan Gajah Mada
Yes,
in
Denpasar.
Denpasar,
Yep.
there was Ang Ban Siong.
Ang
wasn't
Bang
that his
Siong,
name?
yep.
And his telephone number was 22.
Wow. Not many phones
No,
around now.
there's a label on some of our records, Ang Ban Siong, so he put his label when he was selling them.
Amazing.
So,
And even they
yeah.
write the titles of the songs in the Balinese Aksara, the Balinese
Right.
letter,
exactly.
just to make it easier to communicate to the Balinese people during the time.
Right, the Balinese script
Yep.
was actually printed on the labels. So they did think that there was a market for it, which was crazy, not let alone that the depression happened in 1929,
Sure, yeah.
began, or the stock market. So what happened was McPhee, everyone who knows McPhee's work knows that he mentioned that the dealer that he knew, so he said the person who sold the records in a fit of rage once destroyed his entire collection.
Because
And
he just
McPhee-
felt they will never sell.
Right. McPhee bought one whole set, and I think he went back to the United States, then came back to Bali, and the guy had already destroyed his records.
Wow.
So it turned out, though, that Ang Ban Siong was another, that there were other people selling records, and actually that's a whole other story. So a couple of other historical things. So besides Kebyar was Janger,
Yep.
which also developed in the 19-teens. So 1920s. It
The
was still
social
just,
dance.
Right, and which still exists now very
Yeah.
much, Janger. So another thing,
Yeah.
the electric microphone was invented in 1925 or 6. I'm blanking out exactly,
Yeah.
but it was either 25 or 6, and they had one. So the Odeon and Becca companies actually came here with state-of-the-art, for then, for 1928, 29, equipment, including the electro microphone, which, according to our partner Alan Evans, was a big deal.
Everything kind of conspired for us to have these recordings today.
Yeah.
In some weird way, the West had all this technology. Bali was kind of building up on the map. Odeon had a really terrible business manager at the time. So in order to have these recordings, all of those things had to line up essentially for us to have these archives now. So
Yes.
you've collected all of the archives that you believe exist.
Yep, 111.
111
Tracks,
of the
music.
so music, and then you digitized.
So to get back to the films, though, so we had the McPhee. It was like about 5 hours.
Yes, 5
of
hours.
films that UCLA gave us.
After being stored for more than 40 years.
exactly. So it was
Dusty,
a lot of
becoming
it was,
ghosts.
some of it was deteriorating.
But they digitize and they give you copies of everything.
No,
Or did they
no.
give you? Did they give you the real? I mean,
Oh,
you
well,
have
first
brought
they
some
did.
originals with you.
You're right.
Mm-hmm.
No, you're right. Okay,
Mm.
excuse me. So they digitized, gave me DVDs,
Yes.
and that's what we used.
Yes.
Of course. Okay, sorry. Marlowe was more responsible for all that, for the actual
Technical,
media.
yeah.
So, yeah, they sent me in New York or in Massachusetts the DVDs, and then that's what we used.
Mm-hmm.
So they were not by the year that we're in, 2022 standards. They weren't high resolution
Sure,
by
yeah.
standards now.
Mm-hmm.
We used those. By absolute, I can't go into every story, but the most bizarre circumstance, my wife, whose name is Beth Skinner, who's a dancer and worked in Bali a lot, and theater director. Beth and my mother were online for tickets for a performance, and the woman standing next to them, they got into a conversation. They were all comps. The artists were giving us my family tickets, and this woman tickets, and they wound up getting in a conversation, and my mother said to her, well, my son is in Bali, that's why he's not here. And she said, oh, Bali, my husband was in Bali. His name was Miguel Covarrubias.
No.
And my mother and my wife, Beth, of course, Covarrubias we've known for,
Legend.
since 72, right,
Yeah.
or 7 before we even came to Bali. And she was Rocio Sagon, who was a modern dancer with the Jose Limon Company, who Miguel fell in love with.
Mm-hmm.
So his marriage to Rosa Covarrubias, who was in Bali with him in 1930 to 34, split up, and he married Rocio. And anyway, they became very close friends of ours.
Amazing.
And when Rocio heard that we were repatriating the Colin McPhee films from UCLA, she said, well, I have Miguel's films.
Oh wow.
And
What are the chances
I
of
said,
that?
well, no one knew he had made.
Yeah.
Miguel Covarrubias made them as his sketchbook. That's what Rocio said. So it was just to remember
Yep.
visual
Ah.
cues for all of his drawings.
Yeah.
You could look at the accuracy of, say, the Legong dancers. There are 2 pages in Island of Bali, and they're actually the dancers from Bedulu.
Mm-hmm.
So it was Nyoman Champlung and Pukul and Chigluk.
Mm-hmm.
Those are the 3 dancers' names.
Yes.
And Covarrubias really drew those dancers' backs and their posture.
So you're saying these recordings are
The film.
probably helping it, so the films helped him get the details in because he could sort
Yep.
of
He filmed
pause
it
and-
once,
Yep.
and
Could
and
revisit.
then he could revisit it
Mm.
and do his drawings
Amazing.
accurately of
Yeah.
the Baris dancers from. There's a Baris Gede, Tumbak with the big long poles
Yes,
from the
yes.
village of Tumbao. So I didn't know that it was from Tumbao. Covarrubias didn't identify almost anything. Neither did McPhee in his films. So that's the next story. So anyway, there was that. So we had all these Covarrubias films that Rocio Sagon, and now her daughter is Jael Vinavir, who's responsible for them. And then what happened was, through another bizarre circumstance, Pak Bandem wound up getting, someone gave him a DVD.
No, not a DVD, but
Oh.
the VHS.
VHS.
Yep.
And it was illicit. So it was not permitted. It was, Pak Bandem showed it to me and he said, I gave him a DVD that he had never seen of the Ed Sullivan Show, 1952, December. And it was the Gong Pliatan
Yes.
with dancers, Gusti Raka Rasmi doing the first Oleg Tamulilingan
Wow.
and Wayan Sampi. So I had a copy of that. Don't have to tell you how I got that legally and ethically. But anyway, Pak Bandem had been given a copy of this DVD by a ballet dancer,
Yes.
Ulf
Ulfgard.
Gard,
Yes. From
who-
Sweden.
who retired from Swedish National Ballet or something like that to Bali.
Amazing.
And he had kind of taken it illicitly. He wasn't given this VHS. Somehow he got it and he gave it to Pak Bandem. And I guess you digitized it for Pak
Yes.
Bandem?
Yes.
I think that was sort of to release the guilty conscience of having taken it. It's like, oh, I'll give it back to this
what
project.
he did, what Ulf did, I think everyone agrees was, in service to Bali,
Bali,
and
yeah.
Indonesia.
Absolution.
And humanity,
Absolution, yeah.
absolutely. So anyway, I looked at it and I saw the footage and I thought, we need this. This is
Yes,
ridiculous.
it's by Rolf de Mare,
Ralph Demar,
who came to
Yeah.
Indonesia 37, 38, just only for 1 year, working closely with Claire Holt.
He was actually
Yeah,
here for 2 weeks in
Two-
Bali.
Yeah,
Wow.
In 2 weeks in Bali. He was all around Indonesia.
Mhm.
Claire Holt, yeah.
yeah, and they did
Claire Holt.
more than 48,000 feet of footage from all over Indonesia.
Sulawesi,
Yeah,
Central
so-
Java, Mangku
True.
Negara.
Yeah, and we are lucky because of the VHS. We can complete one, set of the visuals of Bali during the time. And Pa Ed and I, we contacted Dan Music Museum to get the permission to be able to publish the material, in relation to McPhee's and Kofarubia's footage. It took us a while, yeah, Pa, yeah? It
took
took us
years.
took years, to
took
really
years.
convince that this is really important.
Well, the UCLA was willing to, right from the beginning. The same Anthony Seeger, who was at Smithsonian Folkways, who came here in
Yep.
2015 for our launching, he was the director of the Ethnomusicology Archive at UCLA.
Yep.
And we're very simpatico. So he just saw this as a dream for repatriation, which is something that he's been involved with
Yeah.
for years. It's a big theme.
I'd love to sort of
Yeah.
delve into that a little
Okay,
bit, this
yeah.
repatriation side. So we talked about a lot of sort of the recovery, the digitization, sort of the categorization, making these CDs into, because obviously there's a lot of organization of each of the music, right? So you have to, like, as you were mentioning earlier, it's like, oh, this is the, these are the vocal performance, and you're putting things into categories. But this idea of repatriation, I know that, Marlowe, you are part of creating the sort of the online presence of it as well. Where does that come in, and how much of this does repatriating mean? Let's make it public for everyone and everything, or what are the levels of
Yeah.
repatriation that you?
So
that you
the
aim
arch-
for,
true.
yeah.
So the Bali 1928 archive has 3 focus.
Mhm.
The first one, as we've been talking about, discussing, is the repatriation, the return of historical documents, hopefully in physical forms, but we have been focusing more on the digital form. Because there's these 2 perspectives in the world when it comes to repatriation. The first one is the international perspective, which mentions that individuals, communities, governments, they can do repatriation as long as they have the best facility and human resource to do that, to store and keep and disseminate the physical artifacts. And on the other side, you would have the nationalist perspective that says that, all these artifacts, historical documents, should be returned to the place where they originated, because it relates to the identity and also the cultural legacy of the place and the people. But we, Ed and I, we realized that we don't have the best facilities, but we do have this great momentum and chance, to start doing this. And we started in 2013, and we just took that middle path, that we just return the knowledge, the content via technology now, and that is why everything was digitized. And then that was the first part, and then the repatriation aspects of it. We compile all the material, and we moved on to the second step, which is the restoration. We are blessed because Alan did really immaculate work for the restoration of the vinyls, the orgel, yeah.
The audio, the music recordings.
And then with the collection of footage, we together we started to do, with the low res quality then, yeah. We managed to really compile, the visuals of Bali that complements the audio recordings. And then we did the editing, we did the thematic of it. And the last part, which really made this archive, sustainable and generating, more and more collaboration by the day, is the dissemination of the information. So before we talk about how we manage to, persuade, entice, and get the trust by all these institutions, the archive centers, we started actually by going around the island with this collection, with one of our specialty, which we call the Cinema Bali 1928. So we go around to communities where the recordings was done, and then also the footage were taken by McPhee and the others, and just to bridge that connection. So that is the most interesting part. And then we realized that in 2015, when we launched the archive using DVDs and CDs, that technology by the time was already obsolete.
Yeah.
So we had to think like, we want people to be involved. So how do we do that? We went to, let's use the internet, let's use social media, which took us quite a time to get the permission.
Yeah.
But that really helped because it really made it easier to distribute all the information, about what's going on with the archive. And since then, we managed, to do what we call the community-based repatriation. That's the first one, where we go around, we get people to be involved and also bring back the cultural memory from their villages, from their communities, to complement the material from abroad. That's the first one. And the second one is what we call the cross-media repatriation. Just as we can see, not only we have the vinyl records, but we also collect magazines, tourism brochures, which is really good, and others, to really give even stamps.
Wow.
Yeah. So to raise the magnitude of the collection, and as we go along, we get more and more opportunities to unearth the collective memories from the Balinese and the collection from abroad. That really brought the archive together, in terms of a functioning collaboration, not only between Ed and I, but from
We knew that budaya Bali, that the culture of Bali and the arts are really integrated into the communities. You would say in the villages, but now Denpasar is just a whole map of different villages, and even Kuta has a lot of villages that are extremely maintaining their very ancient traditions that I know of. So the idea was this has to get back to, let's say, the people, right? Or to the villages, as well as to the government entities and the schools, absolutely. But it had to be all of that. And that's how we came up with that idea. Publish the CDs and the DVDs, and people could have their own sets. Yeah. And 1,000 is a lot, to distribute. Marlowe was doing it for a few years.
Yes, true.
And people would get wind that their grandmother was, had been recorded. I could give you the whole list. Ni Dayumade Rai was the name she went by, who was recorded 4 tracks of singing. And the grandson came to a seminar we were doing at UNUD, and he kind of stood up with the question period and said, I could give you more information than you have about my grandmother. Yeah. Wow. And I said, please come visit me in Singapadu. And he, he visited me and told me that she used to wear a Cinderella dress to entertain, to actually do the singing in North Bali. So so the point was, the original principle was distributing to village groups, to the Sika. So, if a group was recorded in 28, 29, we made sure that the village group got it. If descendants of the artists, we made sure that they got it. And people who would... So it was on a very grassroots level, as well as all the schools and libraries. So,
so we do have a lot of...
And unusual. It's...
offerings, we do discussions, we do seminars, we do photography exhibitions, because we do have quite a large collection, more than 150 photographs by Colin McPhee, and then Rosa Covarrubias, also by Jack Mershon, Walter Spies, Arthur Fleischman too. And then we are fortunate that the support came also from Rio Helmi, one of our visual bard in Bali, that helped us to reprint and reproduce in terms of the archive qualities, using organic materials, that really made the storytelling of the 1930s collection, more inclusive. And we go around, and then especially with the Cinema Bali 1928, there were times that the Balai Pelestarian Nilai Budaya, or the preservation of cultural values, the department here in Bali, lended me their cinema car. So not only that they screen popular Indonesian movies like Laskar Pelangi, they would also screen the 1928 selected footage.
Amazing.
And we go around to high schools, from junior high schools to universities, just to get people interested in becoming part of this, repatriation.
There's two parts of this that I find really interesting, and from discussions with both of you, and it's the effect that seeing this footage has on Balinese people. But it's different effects for different generations.
True.
So, first question is sort of, I know that Marlowe, you've told me before that there's a race against time to chase down certain people that you've identified who are still alive, but they're very old. So there is a race against time, and once you get them, it's quite a special moment to bring back their own history. Kind of like you mentioned in the first experience you had of that, somebody hearing themselves.
Right. Paparata,
Paparata. And there was another example. Was it Memen Redia?
Yeah. Oh, Memen Redia. Well, Memen Redia is the Jangir singer. I didn't tell you that story. I could tell you that one.
I think Marlowe's told me, but this is a great story. This is a great story. Yeah.
Right. I was just visiting
the boombox story, but
with Memen Redia.
Yes.
I was just visiting her daughter-in-law last week. Actually, yeah. Well, I should start by saying that one thing I wanted to insert is in terms of repatriation of what, or to whom. First I said to whom.
Yes,
repatriation of what is that we have the media, we have the recordings, we have the films and photographs. But what the project has been from the very beginning, even the first interaction with Pak Barata when I finally got to Bali, is that it's actually a repatriation of the memories and knowledge of that oldest generation. So that's what my job has been for the whole project, is visiting with a team of Balinese, a research team of Balinese friends who are musicians, singers, dancers, theater performers, who comes on the trips. The research trips depends on who we're visiting. But since 2003, that's what we're still doing it. So it's been 20 years that we do this research. So in the year 2003, you could come across, say, the first one was Wayan Pagag, who was in Tanjung Bungkat, Denpasar, and his group was playing the gambang, ritual gamelan gambang. He was blind and almost deaf, almost completely deaf.
Wow.
So we have a photo of, I gave his son these big Sony headphones to put on him, and we started up the music, and he kind of yelled out, "Demung!" Demung was the name of the gending of the song. So that was probably the first one other than Pak Brata.
It's kind of almost like a reactionary, just like a reaction that comes out.
Well, for people, it's very emotional, and really, the first volumes that we published in 2015, I wrote about, it was like 450 pages, the CD notes. And it was really not just knowledge that I had ever had, but it was putting in years of visits to these, all of these artists, mostly we were focusing on people who were 100 or 90, and still are, but there are fewer and fewer people now in 2022.
Yeah.
But so basically, it's the impact on people. I mean, I could tell you so many stories. There was Gede Lila in North Bali, so a village, Jenang Dalam. And there's a film of this elderly guy in 1930s performing the trombone. He was a gamelan musician, maestro, playing, but he was playing it in a way that was very dance-like. And we had no idea where this was. And it was just on one of my many trips to the Colin McPhee collection. I was looking through his glass slides. So slides back then were glass. And there was a photograph of this gamelan and this guy playing. And Colin McPhee had written in pencil, Jenang Dalam. And I didn't even know that was the name of the village. I came back and asked someone, maybe Marlowe Bandem or someone, what's Jenang? Oh, that's a village. So we went up there. And in any case, we wound up visiting the oldest people and learning that Gede Lila was the name of the trombone player. And his son was still alive. Gede Mataram was his name. He was like 100 years old.
Wow.
And he also couldn't see, but he looked at the film. He saw his father. He didn't know what a laptop was. This was 20 years ago. He didn't know what a laptop was. And he's looking and he says, Papa. And then he looks up at his son, who was closer to my age, and he looks like, what's going on? Why is Papa inside this
Box.
box?
Yeah.
So, these are just, there are like 200 stories like that.
Yeah.
Memen Redia was, okay, so Ketut Arini, Ni Ketut Arini in Banjarlaban, and Basar is a great Legong master teacher who's been a friend of mine forever, since 72. And I showed her a photograph that I knew was Janger from Kadaton, the village right next to hers. So she said, I think, that's the 100-year-old woman who's a Janger performer, and she lives right there. So the next day, a whole group, Ketut Suryatini, Arini, Kodi, Ketut Koni, I think Onki came, and Komang Onki there. We met Memen Redia, whose name had been Wayan Pampan when she was a little girl. And she looked at the photograph and said, Sing Tiang. That's not me.
Tan Tiang.
Tan Tiang. Sing, maybe Tan or Sing, I don't know, depending how polite she was. So we were all disappointed. And I said, well, I have a bunch of Piringan Hitam, Orgo, recordings, and I could play them in my tape, my boombox. So, mau dengar, mau bisa. So I put on the Janger Kadaton, the first track, and she said, Nikitiang. That was her, she was the singer, the Pungugal, it's called, the lead singer. And then we got to the next, we listened to the whole thing, and then the next one, she said, Nikitiang. She was the singer for all of Janger Kadaton's tracks.
Nikitiang meaning this is
That's
me.
This is me.
This is me.
Yeah.
So not only... So Ketut Kodi, who's a Dalang and Topeng performer, read her all of our transcriptions of the lyrics to the songs, but just based on listening with headphones. And she would say, "Sing bana." That's not right, And so Kodi we'd say, "Okay, what are the?" And she remembered all the lyrics. She was about 94 then. She wasn't 100, but she was about 94 then. She was a 10-year-old singer in 1928. So she remembered all the lyrics. Not only that, but she remembered the process of being recorded. She described that the Odeon or Becca, whoever recorded, I can't remember, there were two companies, that they would only allow for one take. So if the group or the singer messed it up, that was it. Because it was the acetate was it was all beeswax. There was a whole, you could look it up, Google it, but it was a very specific process, and they only would allow for one take. So that explains certain tracks where there was a mistake. And we could hear, there's a mistake, but that was the reason. So anyway, she was an amazing resource. And we identified many of the dancers in the films.
Yeah.
There was a Covarrubias
Yes.
film of
Nipa-
Jangir Kadatan.
Yes.
And what else are you remembering from her? Because there was a
Which-
lot with that.
Well, which came to surprise for her when she saw her.
Well, when she okay, yeah, excuse me. So then I said, well, actually, there's also a film, ada apalagi ada film. Then I started the Covarrubias film, and she's looking at the girls getting their costumes on and putting on makeup, and again she says, Nikki Tiang, that was her, and she's actually smiling from Miguel Covarrubias.
Yeah.
She was a real performer from the age of 12 or
Wow.
10. So we have her there, and actually I had blown up a photograph, frame. I do this all
Yeah.
the time. If I think of it or if someone asks, always. So if there's a descendant. And there's a photograph, or we could do a still capture. So we printed up a still of her at the age of 10. And when she died years later, at the age of closer to 100, they actually used the framed picture for her ngaben,
Wow.
where they put it up
Yeah.
on the wada.
Yeah.
Yes.
So they had this photo, and nobody could believe it.
Yeah.
Katut Arini told me, nobody could figure out
Yeah,
how did they
beautiful.
have a
They
photo.
get this, yeah. Because I
So-
mean, back then, no one very few people locally had anything to record themselves.
Record or photograph.
Or photograph,
Even the great
or-
masters,
Mm.
Ida Bagus Boda,
Yeah.
who really was Ida Boda.
Yeah.
There was no photograph of him, his family. I know his grandson,
Yeah.
and they had no photo. They had a painting
Yep.
that a grandson
Yeah.
had done. And
So
we
it's-
came up with the first. Now we have many photos of him.
Well, I mean, for these people, then it's
Yeah.
not really just repatriating an arts or like a recording of arts. It's for these people, it's repatriating their own family memory, which is
Yes.
crazy. I mean, to think that.
Yeah, never expected that. We never. See,
Yeah, it
we
was
never
always just sort of
imagined
oral
Yeah.
tradition, etc. Or if you met them, you just or
It's a
didn't meet
culture.
them,
It's a culture.
and it just kind of gets passed
Yeah.
down. But to have the luxury that we've always had, just to look back and like, oh, here's grandma.
Mhm.
Mhm.
I guess there were so many generations who just were, they didn't have that.
They
right?
didn't have that sense of the
Yeah.
past. And then even from an artistic kind of, I mean, you could call it academic, but it's also just artists are interested in how things came about.
Mhm.
For sure, yeah.
The photographs and the films indicate to people, how is this done? How is the dance done?
Yeah.
So, for instance, Gede Lila, I was saying, playing the trompong in that way.
Mm.
Now it
It's-
became
it's like a learning resource,
Mario's
or-
Eagle Trompong, or Kabyar Trompong, it's known as now,
Right. Yeah.
by created by Katut Mario
Yeah.
from Tabanan. But now people are used to people playing that way. But it had to be Colin McPhee's my reading McPhee's description, and he was saying, well, in the north, this was around 1930, the trompong players turn it into a dance in Bleleng, in Singaraja area.
Wow.
In the south, they weren't doing that yet.
Mm.
So it was a northern style that McPhee's film shows us. Oh, this guy, Gede Lila, was playing in that style.
No, it's been
So it's
revived,
incredible bukti, it's incredible proof, evidence. And you can't argue. This is one of the things about the
Yeah.
project.
So
You can't
yeah,
argue
true.
with your ears or
I
with
mean,
your eyes.
yes.
Mm.
Aside
So-
from the challenges in terms of copywriting and licensing,
Mm.
the internet has been really a great help, especially the use of social media, because we want to invite and let people be involved to help us identify the personalities, the dances, the rituals, the scenery that is contained in the footage. And that is why now our focus is more on, what we do, keep upgrading the qualities of the footage,
Mhm.
yeah, which is thankful. We do have it now in 2K quality, that really really changes
That's
how
really high definition.
yeah,
That's good
so
video.
so really changes our perspective on how to run the archive now. And then I mean in terms of the first phase, by just letting everything out there, it really brought people in, helped us, and it made the exposure and increased the trust to all these world archives that this project is functioning well
Mhm.
and creating impact.
Yeah.
because when we talk about archives, definitely the first thing you would consider is, that's just documentation and archiving of all these legacies.
Yeah.
But the 1928 archive has been elevating the game, and then to focus more, because Ed has shown it and has published. Hopefully the book comes soon, Pa.
Yeah.
So Ed has
I'll
been
talk about
writing
that.
these 5 essays about all the collections. So the second one is in terms of to encourage the research in terms of the wealth of the material. And not only, it involves Ed, but involves other sources. But in terms of the younger creative community, the dissemination project has, expanded the interest. Not only academics now, but the whole, people of Bali, the society. You would have, activists of environmental activists that invites us to show the footage by McPhee and Kofarubias in terms of the sceneries, and do a discussion about how, in the future, these NGOs, the government can safekeep the Balinese environment.
That was actually going to be the second part. We were talking about sort of the older generation, the effects on them. Marlowe, as being Balinese, what are you seeing? What effects are you seeing to the young generation when they're showed this footage? Are you seeing a sense of nostalgia? Are you seeing a sense of, I guess, of pride? I mean, they weren't there, so it's kind of it's a nostalgia of something they've never experienced. So what are the effects? What are the reactions? And what do you think are the effects upon the younger generation?
It really gives terkejut, surprise. I mean, it really gives the platform for the younger generation to become more critical about the development of Bali, especially as a one of the most famous island, and then it allows them to really have a foundation to talk about Bali. And then as I mentioned before, having these screenings with all these different kind of communities give us also different angles in terms of how to make the material available out there. We did a collaboration with Walhi, and not only they provide us with the time and the crowd to just enjoy the footage, but they also created a zine for us, and really made a reading about how the collection can be a study for the Balinese.
Walhi?
I don't know.
Walhi is the Wahana Lingkungan Hidup, is the in one of the NGO that really is concerned with the environments here in Bali, and that gave us a different perspective. And then we would have other communities like theater communities that did which comes to the third part. So after the archive and documentation, you would have the research, but for us, the archive has allowed the rise of new creations, intermingling with the archives, because now there's been a surge in using archive materials as new form of contemporary art. And luckily we are so open, we give that opportunity, and there has been a lot of performance art, collaborating with us. I and Ridwan Rianto, one of our editors, we did performance art called I Promise You Eternity, which really puts the perspective that these materials are, living legacies, living culture. And we projected, on top of water, this and that, with performances, which later become the idea as an addition when we do the screenings, the Bali 1928. So we bring live performances to give context. So I'm not saying that we're going to the direction of making this a show, no, but as a representation that it's developing more organic. It involves participation and collaboration, and not only now it's a study about the specific arts and culture as we mentioned in the 1930s, but it becomes a comprehensive study about the overall Balinese culture. So I hope that this really proves to our collaborators abroad to keep, supporting with new materials. And the dissemination, well, I didn't tell you the story about one of the records were acquired through bidding.
Several probably.
Yes, yeah. So
had to
bidding from
bid, on
marketplaces.
Wow.
Right,
Yeah.
On like eBay or something.
eBay.
Yeah.
Alan
Yeah.
was used. Well, Marlowe was always fond of this one, which was the one from some small town in Texas.
Yeah.
And
Amazing.
I think that no, that was okay. So there was a guy in England who contacted us who had about 3 or 4 tracks of Jangar Kadaton. The one other thing I want to mention, because Marlowe has pointed this out, during a period when there was a period of months that I wasn't around, but the strong reaction from young people, especially, who were interested in the performing arts footage, but the strongest reaction was the lingkungan alam, the environmental, what was the world that their grandparents occupied.
Yes. Yeah.
And luckily, it was really McPhee
Yes.
who had some kind of ethnographic genius. He was a pianist. He wasn't an anthropologist. He wasn't an academic. He was a composer and pianist. But he had the sense, being in Bali, and he did really incredible photographic work of the natural environment and the trees and the plants, and then following them to being harvested and then in the marketplace, and then how they were used. So you got this incredible kind of film ethnography from this pianist, modern composer in the 1920s and 30s, that is an amazing resource for for everybody to see what was the environment, especially as Bali is changing so rapidly now.
Yeah.
So, that's one of the things. And then, go ahead.
It's
sorry.
on that point, just because, like you both, you've seen Bali over so many years, and my dad's been here for Indonesia for 40 years, right? So, and he's like a lot of expatriates, especially who have been here for 40 years. They're so grumpy about today. They're so grumpy about Bali isn't the way it was, etc.
Sure.
And the reason is because they saw what it was. And I equate it to sort of tourists today. If it's your first time coming to Bali, you don't know any different. So it's like, they might be the grumpy people in 20 years saying, now Bali was much better.
Yes.
So we're always looking back, but I never thought about it as the Balinese young generation not understanding their own environment from the past, because they don't have that sense of loss if they don't see it.
Exactly.
Right? So it's kind of like, look where we've come from and look where we are, sort of rethink where you think we should go. Right? You know what I mean?
Exactly.
So
No,
it's
that
like
is something. Yeah,
it's like a mirror. It's like,
Mhm.
that's where we were.
Yep.
This is where we are. This is what's happened in between. Where do you want to go? Where do you want to take us? Right?
And that is why we continue on developing what we call the mirror archive. So we are open to collaboration with institutions that would present and display, 10 to 20% of our archive at their archive. And then in return, we also display their collection, which, that hopefully would relate, And we really need this community-based archive, One day, we were screening it at Banjar Gerenceng, one of the most, famous hamlets in Denpasar. And I brought one of the photos of their Bali Kulkul. Bali Kulkul is the
Bell Tower.
And then from the 1930s. And then I presented to them with a hope in return that they would unearth VHS, Betamax, cassettes, from their neighborhood, and present that as a collection at the Banjar itself. So when we wanted to know more about, Banjar Gerenceng, or let's say Pliatan or the other hamlets, we would just need to go to their own banjar. So it really creates that connection.
It's like a decentralized
Yes.
network of museums.
Yeah,
basically.
and imagine Bali becoming an island of archives.
Village museums.
Yeah, and then we're lucky because of that sense of longing of the old Bali, if we can say like that, has helped us with donators that are sending materials to the archive for free. Like 8mm footage, films, and then 16mm postcards, stamps, books, and then we compile that, to become a more comprehensive center for study.
Yeah.
Yeah, and this has been became a leading example in terms of how to really make archival material available for the public.
Yeah, because traditionally, it's like a national level. Usually, it's a national level initiative.
True.
Where again it's centralized back in the country, but it's still back in an archive where it's inaccessible, right? So this is a way of saying we're bringing it to the country and we're bringing it to the people. So it's like a double effect that is
And
not
then
normal.
there's this effect too for the archives. So nobody has been, really talking about McPhee or Covarrubias out of the academic circle. Yeah. But now suddenly people are interested in McPhee, in Covarrubias, and day by day you would see publications about these researchers.
Yeah.
And we were so blessed that in 2019 it was a full circle because during the Bali Jani Festival, a government-sponsored festival, we managed to do a collaboration and have two pianists playing tabuh-tabuhan.
Wow.
So it's a full circle, having McPhee borrowing and learning from the Balinese gamelan, and then, compose his own version about it, and then made him won awards, the Art and Prize Letter in 1954. And then suddenly you would have, young generation Indonesian playing that composition in front of the Balinese public.
Yeah. If that's not a sign of the art returning upon itself, but in a modern format, right? So it's not sort of a circle, it's a spiral upwards of it evolving but coming back around. The best thing to hear now is what are your plans, and what would you like, how would you like people to support you? How can people join you, support you, take part? What do you hope for?
Well, right now, let me answer, and then Marlowe can answer really more clearly on that. In terms of where we're going, is we actually published those 5 volumes, DVDs and CDs in 2015. And then Arbiter of Cultural Traditions in New York published a 5-volume set, which is available internationally, through their website or through every internet kind of medium of dissemination. But what's going on right now is that I'm completing the book, which is a compilation of and totally development of those 5 articles, so that were written about everything that was recorded and all the films. So the book should be finished in the next several months.
Oh, wow.
And it's going to be published as a book in English and in Bahasa Indonesia.
Fantastic.
So it'll be published here in both languages. So there's that. And then there are 2 other books coming up for next year, which are based on the Margaret Mead and Gregory Bateson collection, which we didn't really speak of, which we have gotten the rights to repatriate and publish whatever is useful, whatever we and our Balinese colleague or their Balinese colleagues feel is useful from all of Gregory Bateson's films, which is about 9 hours.
10 hours.
10, okay. 10 hours. And thousands of photographs, which I have access to. So we have access to, but I have gotten them, and they're in my hard drives right now. So we're putting together two more publications beyond the book on Bali 1928, which is based on the Margaret Mead, Gregory Bateson films and photographs, but also part of that collection is Jane Below,
Yes.
who we haven't really mentioned, who was Colin McPhee's
His
wife, and she was studied anthropology at Columbia University before they came, and it was Colin and Jane sitting in an apartment in winter of 30-31, and Claire Holt had come back from Bali and had these records, and they listened to some of the Odeon records, and Colin turned to Jane and said, "When do we leave?" And they got married and were here in 6 months.
Amazing.
So Jane Below was an incredible ethnographer. She did a great book called Trance in Bali,
Yes,
and
I've read
another
parts
called
of it,
and another Traditional Balinese Culture, which was a collection of different essays. So she did incredible anthropological work, but also really her films were really excellent also. So there's all of that footage, and we're putting together, there are two different publication projects starting now. I mean, we've been working on it already.
Work never ends.
We've been working
So
on it, but
when
it's
we
going to go
do-
into next year,
Sure.
which
Yeah.
we need support for. So Marlowe can talk about all that.
So when we talk about phase 2 of the Bali 1928 universe, so we already have the publication of the McPhee, Koparubias, and Rovdemari collection, but the second phase includes the new release of the high resolutions, which comes back to the point is how we will rethink the dissemination process in terms of the technology. So now we're developing multimedia applications, which is cloud-based and also physical-based, which would accompany later the publication. And we're now trying to, not saying to limit the access, but to create a pathway or gateway for more serious access to all of these materials. Because after the McPhee, Koparubias, and Rovdemari collection, we definitely have the 2-hour Jane Below collection, which really concerns with the sacred trance dance in all over Bali.
Yeah.
And we have the Gregory Bateson and Margaret Mead collection, 36 and 239, and that's 10 hours. And not only about ceremonies, not only about dances, but also the life and ceremonies concerning, the life cycle of birth in Bali, and especially the relationship between children and mother. That's really amazing.
Yeah.
And then from there, we passed 1931. We have to remember that in 31 we have the Pliatan and Ubud group that perform at Paris Colonial Exposition. We do have access to the materials, but we haven't really, studied the communication with BNP in France about that, because that is also one of the important period.
The Expo in 1931.
Which was kind of like the export of to sort of live.
Exactly. It was
Yes,
the
for 6 months.
first export of live Balinese performers.
Yep. And we would jump to the period after independence. And then also, we're hoping to close with 1952, the excellent performance of the Kecha and also the Olek Tumulilingan by Wayan Sampeh and Raka Rasmi at the Toast of the Town at Sullivan Show. And we have
Christmas 1952.
Yes, so we have the collection of Sampeh when he was a young boy that helped McPhee find his way back to his villa.
Sampeh saved his life.
And
actually.
adopted Sampeh, not only teaching him mathematics, not only teaching him to write and read, but also took Sampeh all over the island to learn dances from all the great maestros until Sampeh performed in the US 1952. So we have, the storytelling about this, and we are working on that, and hopefully, as we go along, we would get more support in terms of more materials, more opportunities to go to communities. We are very happy for, many corporations, including you, that really open up the door for us to, talk about this, for a wider and more specific audience. And we need corporations to be part of this. One of the best way to care about Bali is to really unearth its legacies and work from there. And now with I do believe the pandemic is over. So now we're really looking forward to go out there to schools, to places all over Bali, and especially with Ed, that comes every couple of months to Bali to
I've
continue.
been back and forth, except for this pandemic period of
Mm-hmm.
2 years and a quarter, not being able to return.
Mm-hmm.
But other
So
than
we
that,
want to go out
I'm
there.
back and
Back
forth
and
all
forth
the time.
Through
the year.
we have been showcasing all these materials in front of 50, 100 people, in the villages, in the festivals. But
Right.
it doesn't matter if it's only 5 to 10 people.
Yeah.
Because you never know who's there and how they can also contribute to not only in terms of the archive but to Bali as a whole.
So it's not just about sort of paying it back to you for that information
No.
in that
No.
sense, but it's really like
No.
what effect it has and what that can sort of wake up within them to do something.
Well,
forward,
it's
right?
on a aesthetic, artistic level to the degree that, say, for example, kind of maybe the most famous angklung group in Bali is from Sidan, Gianyar. And it's actually, in the village, they don't even call their group, their music angklung. It's klentangan, because it's an old kind of, the rayongs are played sideways, and that the instrument is klentangan. So it's a very old form of angklung, and they were recorded in 1928. And I've gotten to know the musicians, and the oldest musician, Wayan Rata. When they first heard the gending, the performance of the songs, the compositions, they thought, well, it's different, it's simpler. Now we play more complex. And I gave them the CD, and then, the next time I visited, maybe 6 months later, they said to me, the oldest, but the younger, who was more my age, and then his son, who was a teenager, they said, actually, we've been listening to it, and we realized that it was more complex back then, and we're trying to figure out how to reconstruct it.
Wow.
And that was, I've always had that in mind, especially, my field has been vocal music in Bali. I wrote a book called Voices in Bali. Haven't translated it to Indonesian yet. But in any case, I'm really interested in how the styles were so different back then. And that's something that students and vocalists all over Bali are communicating with me all the time. UNUD, students at Udayana University, who are listening to the recordings and then trying to, to revive.
Yeah.
Well, to revive, to hear what people were doing then. Actually, the tonalities were different. So now the pitches.
So things that sort of got lost or sort of changed so much over the years, bit by bit, they're able to just go back to the source and be like,
That's
that's what's changed.
That's it. So in terms of the instrumental music and the vocal music, it's a living entity. So we were just discussing that. We keep discussing this, that these materials are, William Faulkner, the famous quote, the past is not dead, it isn't even past. And Bali, we were just discussing this, Marlowe and me, is a great example of that, that with our experience with these materials now, it's alive. The voices are alive, the dancers are alive, the rituals are alive, and especially as we get to higher resolution, it's more inviting to this generation of people who are used to video and technology like that. So it's really an incredibly moving thing.
We even have a metaverse for Bali 2020.
I was just about to say, I'm waiting for the virtual reality version of it.
We made a metaverse and then we launched it in front of our colleagues from the media.
Wow.
Just to show the opportunity about new environment to learn.
Yeah.
Especially for the younger generation who are really adept and born with technology.
Digital natives.
Yeah, so not only that we are focusing on augmented reality, but we also have been doing virtual reality with this. So hopefully one day you would see Sampai Mario dance as a hologram soon.
Wouldn't that be very cool? Well, Ed, Marlowe, thank you so much for your time today. I think everyone will agree that this project is amazing. We're looking forward to it to grow. Looking forward to the book. Looking forward to phase 2, 3, 4, 5, metaverse, NFTs, or wherever it becomes.
Yes.
But more than anything, the effect that it will hopefully have on today's generation going forward. So thank you.
Well, thanks for your great questions. You really
Pleasure.
touch them all
So
the right points.
Bali1928.net. Bali1928.net.
But people who are only English speakers can go to edwardherbst.net.
Okay.
Marlowe created the website, so everything is collaborative.
Okay, perfect. So we've got an English version and we've got the
and the
Indonesian
same
version.
basic materials are on both websites.
Okay,
Yeah.
great. Well, thank you so much, and looking forward to sharing your
Great
story.
pleasure. Yeah.
Thank you.